Welcome to another episode of the Rich Sony podcast. Today we have Jeffrey Lewis with us. Thanks for joining, Jeffrey. How you doing?
Hi, doing all right. Hello from New York City.
For listeners, I want to give a short intro of you, and I also want to I want to mention I'm going to put a lot of links in the show description, links to other interviews you've done, to other resources. I want to try to skip through a bunch of that and give some people cliff notes and see if we can get into some new things maybe that you haven't talked about before, if you don't
Great.
mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, Jeffrey, and of course interrupt me if I get any details wrong. That's totally fine. But yeah, Jeffrey, one thing I like about the way that you describe yourself is you're a comic book artist who has a day job as a songwriter, right?
Yeah.
You still go by that? I know you've mentioned that a few
Yeah,
times.
I'll stand by that. Although um there are people who are like real 24/7 devoted comic book artists who might take offense at me considering myself a comic artist when I'm not daily in the trenches chained to my drawing desk the way serious artists are. But I like to think of myself as a comic book artist. I feel like that's my calling and my lifelong artistic engagement.
Sweet. I mean, I think you are, but I'm not in that world, right? I've read a bunch of your comic books. We'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, so it's interesting that you frame yourself that way. I think that's a huge differentiator that you have as a songwriter. Um, and I actually in Statix. So Statix is Jeffrey's newest comic book series. I'll hold it up for anyone that's not listening and watching. I think it was in the first one. It doesn't matter. I think it's in the first one though that you mentioned you have a segment called "Why Would I Be So Stressed Out?" Right? Do you remember this one?
Yeah, yeah,
I think that's a really good. I was trying to figure out how to give just the quick who Jeffrey Lewis is from a bird's eye, and I really liked sort of these things that you have combating in your head, and I liked how you nestled the influences in there. So you said you want to make comics as good as Alan Moore or Eight Ball by Daniel Close, which I don't even know any of those. I'm gonna have to follow up after this. Write songs as good as Daniel Johnston, draw as good as Robert Crumb, rock as hard as the Velvet Underground, play gigs as mind blowing as Yola Tango, right? And then not in there, but I'm adding myself. You also do it all with this punk rock DUI ethic, reminiscent of the Fall or the Minutemen, Crass, etc. So that's kind of I'm using your words to describe it. Do you think that's a fair sort of
yeah.
cool?
That's as good as that's as close to a condensed elevator pitch as I could come up with.
I love it. And from my own interpretation, I think your work is very meticulous and prolific, right? Like especially in some of your early comics that you had done, that seems to be an element too. And I don't know if
Yeah, well, I'm glad I fooled you into thinking that.
that's
So that's I love when people think I'm prolific.
yeah. I no, I think you're prolific. You've got quite a bit of. I mean, again, actually, I have it right here. I think this is a good flow, right? So one of the things that I find most interesting, and I wanted to talk about first with you, is your low budget videos, which I think you have 50 ish of, which is
Yes.
that's prolific, man.
Well, for 25 years, not so much, I would say. But
Touche. That's fair.
that's the thing is like I feel like it's all relative to the amount of time that's gone by. So yes, I mean compared to somebody who's just been starting their artistic endeavors within the last 5 years, they might look at my body of work and be like, he's done so much stuff. But then you got to look at like how much time all of that has been done in, and then you're just like, oh, actually, that's not that much stuff compared to how many years he's been doing it.
This is true. That is fair. And I think that goes back to the Yola Tango influence, right? I think there's something to say about doing something for so long. That might be a good segue. I think that I wanted to ask you definitely about that, about your longevity and how you continue to approach your do-it-yourself ethic. I know on the last interview that I found of you, the last podcast you'd done, you had mentioned our mutual friend Mallory was helping you book your most recent tour. How did that
Yeah,
go?
I just got off the phone with Mallory a couple minutes ago,
Nice.
and she's working on booking this October tour now. Uh, and it's great. Yeah, we're in constant contact about what's going on with the booking, and I'm kind of advising her on haggling certain deals. And she has experience booking for her own band, Grasping Straws. She's booked her own tours before, um, so it's not like she's a newcomer to the whole activity of it. But then there are certain things where I need to be overseeing, like, is this deal okay for us to accept, or like, which of these people do I have experience working with before, and do I think that room is okay for us, and things like that. So I can't entirely just have her make 100% of the decisions on it, but she's doing a great job, and I think we have a really good working interaction going on now with this tour booking thing.
Awesome. And so that I'm assuming, but as we were talking about in our email, that that time tends to just take up itself like a gas in a chamber or something, right? Like, has that
Yeah.
helped you free up creative time? Because I'd imagine that doing all of this work yourself, or a lot of it, stifles that creativity at points.
Yeah, very much so, because it's not as, yeah, I mean, the amount of hours that I've spent just booking and organizing tours over the last 20 years, it's like, geez, if I'd put all that time into making comics or making songs, like, uh, I could have gotten so much done. Plus, I would have improved my skills, my craft. But it is what it is. I mean, there's a balance between art and commerce, and you have to spend a certain amount of time just reading contracts and responding like, oh, I don't like this part of the contract where you say you have complete rights to this work that I'm doing, for forever in all territories. Like, can we change that to you have rights to, for the next 5 years just in the U.S. and Europe territory, whatever. Like, there's a million things like that all day long, every day. And I'm not a big enough artist at the level where there's a team of professionals handling all that stuff. Somebody's got to do it, and if there's no one else to do it, that person has had to be me most of the time. But it's not so insurmountable. It's not, anybody who has a brain and a literacy and a sense of, like, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. I'm sure I've made many errors over the years, things I could have done better, but a lot of it is just kind of common sense, but it is time consuming. And I don't know, some of the, when you were talking about the influences, Yola Tango, Daniel Clowes, all those sorts of people, I imagine they had to do quite a lot of that also. I mean, going on and on and on. I mean, to this very day, I'm sure Clowes has to deal with contracts about books and comic books and movie scripts he might be working on, reissues of his stuff. Yola Tango has to deal with, like, what tour do they want to do? Do they want to go back to Asia? And how much money are they going to make on that tour? And whatever. I have no idea what these people do. I know they have management teams and booking agents and literary agents and whatever else, but they still, I don't think any of them are able to, like, completely ignore. Yeah, I really don't know. I don't know how much oversight,
Yeah,
hands-on, they have to do.
but there's the fear, I haven't been able to make any significant career out of my own songwriting or any artistic endeavors, but it still looms on in my life as I go on. But there's this thing in my mind always, like, even with Bob Dylan, I have his photo right there. He's my favorite artist, right? And I always think of him getting ripped off by Albert Grossman, right? And have you ever had that kind of fear in your head? Is that where this DUI thing comes from, or is it budgetary? Like, why do you choose to do it that way, or is it a choice?
Well, in some ways, it's really just not a choice. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there has never really been anybody clamoring to make stuff happen for me. If I just sat around and waited for somebody else to come along and book a tour or whatever it was, release an album, publish a comic book, it just wouldn't happen. I would just still be waiting. I'm just not exciting enough to the industry, or whatever calculations they make in the professional realm of, like, oh, this guy is going to make a lot of money for us, so we better whatever it is. I've just never been appealing enough to the industry, whatever industry it is, comic books or music or anything else. So if I wanted anything to happen, it was just a matter of doing it myself. And that, I never really thought of that as a bad thing. I didn't take that as a mark of failure. I just kind of took for granted, like that's how it is. That's what I need to do. I'm not aiming to be. It never crossed my mind at all that I would be in the professional industry musically to an extent that I would have teams of people working for me. I never planned on being in the music industry at all. I was just playing at open mic nights and recording tapes of my songs, which was inspired by Daniel Johnston entirely. Daniel just made it seem like, oh, you can just make songs and record them. And if people like them, then they'll tell other people, hey, check out this tape of songs by this person, or make them a copy of the tape themselves. And it would just rely on, it could spread around by word of mouth if the material was, exciting enough or good enough. So, so I didn't really approach it in the sense of, I never sent my stuff out to record labels hoping to get signed. I never applied to venues to try to get, I never sent demo tapes to try to get gigs. I was, however, at that time when I was starting out, in my early 20s, mid 20s, I was sending my comic books out to comic companies. After I got out of college, I figured that was, that this is how you start in the comic book world. You start sending your stuff out to companies, and you start piling up the rejection letters until at a certain point, you make somebody gives you a chance. But I also had this sense that I wasn't good enough yet in the comic book realm. I was like, I'll do that someday when I feel like my material is so strong that they are less likely to reject me. I feel like there's no point in sending comics to a publisher when I already know that I don't have my chops yet at the level where they're going to be blown away by it. I'm working towards that. So that was like my calculation on that. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe I should have had more confidence with the comics and like pushed myself in front of people, and then, like fake it till you make it. I wasn't in the comic world. I didn't have a fake it till you make it attitude. I just kind of felt like I'm going to keep working at this. And when I get good enough that I feel ready to want people to look at it, then I'll make that move. And that's what I finally did with the Statix series. I kind of felt like, okay, now I'm going to start this new comic series, and I feel like I'm good enough. I'm like, I've really learned how to make comics. I feel like this new Statix comic series that I've been doing is a real representation of somebody who knows how to make comics. So I did have the confidence at that point to be like, I sent it out to a bunch of companies. I sent it out to all the companies that I could, really.
And you got a good deal, right?
Yeah, I ended up getting a surprisingly good deal. So that's cool. I mean, it only took me, 25 years to get to that level. I'm 48, and I've been, when I graduated college back in 1997, and I made my first full-length comic book, and I was 21, and I mailed that comic to a bunch of companies. And so, that's many, many years ago, it's decades ago, but no question, I have gotten much better. I look at that comic that I mailed out to companies in 1997. I was very proud of that work at that time, but Statix 100% blows it out of the water, as it should, because I've been honing my craft for 25 years since then.
Sure. And I think that, having this long career, you had a great quote too in another interview. I can't remember it exactly, but you were like, I've never really made it, so I've never had my time pass yet, right? There's something like that. You remember that?
Well, I don't remember specifically, but I do have that. I very much stand by that statement. I'm not if I had had any kind of significant success in the music world, then people would have been like, oh, that he's like kind of washed up. He's trying to make a comeback. He's, he was good back in 2002, and he hasn't been that good since then. But luckily for me, I never had that moment of being like really overexposed or being a thing. I've always just been like bubbling underneath the surface. And I really think I've gotten better and better and better in a lot of ways. I've lost the innocence that the earliest recordings had, but that's inevitable. And of course, whatever whatever comes next in the music career, I might look back on what I'm doing right now and think that it has an innocence that I later lost. So that's just how time passes. So, but I think a lot of the songs that I've written in the last bunch of years are at a level that I could never have even imagined back when I was making the stuff that ended up on my first albums.
That's really cool to hear. Even in my own little songwriting experience, I've noticed myself doing that over time. Do you find yourself filtering out songs that aren't as good faster as you write better ones, or do you still just kind of how do you filter? I know you, maybe you could talk about that. I've heard you before with the open mics, etc., but I'd love to hear your current thoughts on that.
Do you mean in terms of filtering what I choose to play on a live set, or filtering during the writing process?
I'd love to hear both. I think you've talked about both before, but I want to see if it's still, from writing to live performance with a band, what's the process, and when do you throw things out?
Well, writing, I've kind of tried to go in the other direction and really not stop myself from writing anything, even if at the moment it feels like this is the stupidest thing I've ever written. I'm terrible. I'm washed up. Every song I've written in the past year has been worse than the last one. But regardless of that, it doesn't matter. All I need to do is just write another song, put one foot in front of the other, get a song written, play it at the open mic, and I can always work on it more later if I want to change certain lines. But just not filter myself creatively. Just be like, okay, so what? If I'm writing a stupid song, I'm writing a stupid song. Sometimes the song of mine that has the most streams by far of any song on streaming services is Cult Boyfriend. And when I wrote that, I thought it was a stupid song. So who am I to say? That's got over 3 million streams, and it's like, it's become one of my most well-known songs. I wouldn't have predicted that at all. I just wrote that as a silly throwaway. I played it for my girlfriend at the time, and that was about it. I wasn't thinking of that as like, here's my masterpiece that is 10 times better than anything else I've ever written. No way in the world. It was like it may not have even ended up on a record at all. So yeah, I try to just write something because I don't really know what's going to happen with anything that I write. And quite often it happens that when I start writing something and I feel like it's maybe not worth writing, or I'm just dragging myself through it like, oh God, this is a stupid song. But just to get it done, just make sure I get the song written, because I never know. And maybe I'll wake up the next day and be like, that's not a bad song. Or I'll wake up the next day and I'll be like, you know what? Like, I think if I just change this part and this part, that song could actually be really good. So in that sense, I've kind of gotten less filtered with my songwriting. I don't stop myself from writing, and I try to write more than I used to. I used to wait for inspiration. I think when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, I'd wait until I felt like I had a good idea for a song, or I don't know what. And now I'm just like, no, you don't wait for inspiration. You just work, and from that work creates inspiration rather than inspiration creating work. That's basically it. And I stand by that. And that's the same with art. It's the same with songwriting. It's a weird exploration. You have to go through the painful process, and it is emotionally painful and degrading and humiliating, of putting yourself into the realm of the unknown. You don't know how this thing is going to turn out. You don't know how you're going to judge. You don't have a good way to judge what you're making. You don't know what you're doing. It's very uncomfortable to not know what you're doing. It's like if you, I don't know, you go to a summer camp and everybody's playing volleyball, you've never played volleyball in your life, you're not an athlete, it's not fun to go and join in some process that you're not good at, you don't know how to do it, and it hurts your ego. But everything that you're doing for the first time is painful and unknown and humiliating because you don't know what you're doing. And that's what every single song is like, essentially. No song that I don't know what I'm doing when I'm writing every song. I don't know what the song is, what its potential is. It's throwing yourself into the unknown where you're just a helpless baby in the dark every time. You're just going into this zone of this other dimension, and you're just blind and deaf and dumb, and you're just reaching out through all this muck, and you don't know what you're doing. So you got to just be willing to take on that pain and that humiliation of your own helplessness. And that's like interesting. It's weird. It's like it's humiliating, and you got to be humble enough to like get off on the humiliation, like laugh at how stupid you are. So I kind of, yeah, that keeps me going. But then when it comes to the actual live gigs that I'm doing, whether I'm solo or with my band, then I apply maybe too high of a filtration process. I don't know. I want to not. I feel like in my earlier years, I was more willing to play half-assed, unprepared, not great material in live shows, and I'm much less willing to do that. I feel I'd much rather play good material, but I still write a completely different set list for every show. I try to change it up as much as possible. No song gets played 2 nights in a row on a tour. There's about 100 songs to pick from that I would consider playing live. 100 songs is not that much for 25 years of writing songs, that there's only about 100 that I would consider worth playing in a live situation out of hundreds and hundreds that I've written. It's a pretty low batting average. And of the 100 that I select for gigs, maybe there's like 10 that I think are like really good. 10 good songs from 25 years of writing songs. Like, that's a very low batting average. But that's just my own, my own sense of my own filter of what I think is my best material. But I always, in every gig still, I try to allow for the unknown. It's like, I'll put some pieces in to the set that I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure this will be solid, and this will be solid, and this will be solid quality. So I have a little bedrock of stuff that I think is high quality throughout the set, but I'm also going to take some chances throughout the set. Why don't I try out this song? Why don't I throw in this song that I haven't played in many years? Like, maybe that one's not so bad. Why haven't I played that in a while? Maybe I'll try this new song. Maybe I'll try something that I'm not really sure that I'm gonna feel good about afterwards or not. And maybe I feel great about it, or maybe I feel terrible about it, or there's sort of a calculation of how much foundation I want to put in a set, and how much I'm willing to fail also in addition to that.
Sure, that makes sense to me, and I can tell that's probably inspired by Yo La Tango, Grateful Dead, all of those.
Absolutely, and those are the bands that I want to see over and over and over again, that I've seen dozens of times.
Yep.
And they have enough good songs that it's not like they're going to play the same 5 great songs at every set. They've got many great songs to pick from, so every set you're going to get a few highlights, a few iffy bits. I love that. I just very much admire. That's what I want to do as a template for how a band should operate.
I do too, and I just saw you all play at the Williams Center like a month ago, and I have to say my favorite part was when you guys ran through the new songs. It's just fun to, you could see other things on YouTube, you could look up previous performances, etc. But there's nothing like just being somewhere and hearing something new, but then also hearing No More LSD was pretty cool too. Something that I'd expect you possibly to play. That was fun as well. So I don't know. I like it both ways, I guess.
Cool. Well, that was a recent I think it had been a number of years since I played that one live. I don't
Oh,
remember.
really? Cool.
That was like recently resurrected, um, and taught. Part of that comes down to the fact that I haven't, that there's always different musicians in the band because,
Hmm.
uh, every time there's a new drummer or a new bass player or a new keyboard player or whatever it is, um, there's a process of them having to learn dozens and dozens and dozens of songs. So it's like, okay, here's the first 10 songs they're going to learn. Now here's the next 10 songs they're going to learn. Now here's the next 10 songs. And at a certain point, they start learning songs that maybe haven't been done in a while just because, like, at this point, okay, this person has been in the band long enough that now they actually have learned 100 songs. And it's the same for myself. I mean, I'll look at my records and I'll be like, oh, okay, I haven't done this song in a long time. I'll sort of have to relearn it for myself. Um, so yeah, there's a bunch of that just in the sense of like, there's only so much time to even relearn stuff. I I think that Yo La Tengo, there's they seem to have a pretty wide grasp of their own discography, but yeah, I wonder if there's. I'm not. I don't know. I wonder. I'm not like on any message boards or whatever. So I wonder if there's certain songs that really hardcore fans are like, "Oh my god, I haven't played that song in 15 years" or something.
Sure. That's my one complaint about Bob Dylan. I mean, I've seen him, he's my favorite for sure, and I've seen him more than anyone else. But what you get on a tour is a pretty much a set list, and it's just kind of boring to some extent. You can't see him multiple nights in a row and really get anything different. Um,
Yeah,
but he does
yeah.
go into back catalog, which is nice too, and he changes the songs up. But it's not like Yola Tango or the Grateful Dead. Um,
Almost no bands are. I mean, it's very rare for a band to have that format. Yeah, I've seen Dylan a few times, and I really like it. Surprises at a gig are like so fun when you're like, oh my god, I can't believe so and so's playing this, or that's like. So I never want to see the set list ahead of time. I hate when people are
oh
like,
no, me
oh,
neither.
here's the set that they're playing on this tour. I'm just like, I don't want to know. Like, it's just you know.
The only time that I want to do that, I'll do that is if it's a band that I don't know and I want to familiarize myself with their work. I'll try to listen to their stuff a little bit. Um, but
Yeah, well, it is often more enjoyable when it's songs that you're familiar with. Um, but that shouldn't have to be the case. I actually read a really good review of one of my own shows where somebody wrote um, something like Jeffrey is such a good songwriter that don't worry if you go to his shows not knowing any of his songs. Like even the new songs that he's just debuting for the first time are gonna be super enjoyable because they're just well written or something like that. And I thought that was really great. Like that's the idea. Like somebody shouldn't be enjoying my stuff from familiarity shouldn't be the magic ingredient that makes something enjoyable. Like it should, whether it's the first time you're hearing it or the 20th time, it should just be good enough that it's a great experience or at least interesting.
I think that's a great bar to hold to yourself too. And I think that works for your music because you also sometimes with jam bands, like even like with the Grateful Dead, for example, like a song like Dark Star might have taken me a few times. I've only seen them a few times, but and not even with Jerry or anything, but it kind of needed me to get used to. I'm kind of like, all right, when is this going to be over now? But with your music, it's a little different, right? Like you can hear the words, kind of the show carries you through, and I get that, and that is cool to have somebody say that. Um,
Yeah, well, I wish there was a little more musical improvisation with my current band. There have been times in the past where the um, the band lineups that I had or the material that we were doing had more improvisational sections. It hasn't been the case as much recently, but that also depends on how long people have been in the band. Yeah, I never did see Dark Star. All the times I saw the Dead, never caught a Dark Star, but so it goes.
really, that's
Yeah,
wild.
Yeah.
I've seen I went to see Bob Weir and the Wolf Bros like last winter, and they played Dark Star, and I saw Phil Lesh and Friends once, and I don't know if they did or not, but yeah, it was cool. They had like a guy that played with Miles Davis. I forget his name. I should know it, but the bassist came out and he was great.
Cool. I
Um,
saw a really good Phil Lesh and Friends gig a few years back, and I think yeah, I don't know. I was just pleasantly, I thought it was good.
I did
Um,
too. That was the first experience I had. I've seen a lot of dead cover bands, actually. Like a lot of the shows I had played when I was a musician. I am still a musician. I have kids now, so I don't play out as much. I just go to like some open mic nights and stuff. But I played at a lot of wineries and breweries and things like that. And you'll find a lot of really good dead cover bands. And that's how I got into them.
hmm I
Um,
would love to see. I'd be psyched to see a fall cover band. There are fall cover
oh,
bands in England. Um, I'm unaware of. I've never been aware of like any happening in New York. There's a suicide tribute night happening next month. I'm kind of excited to go see
really?
that.
Where is
Uh,
that?
at Bowery Electric on June 20th.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, I feel like, and I kind of think cover bands are kind of cheesy, of course, but at the same time, there's certain bands that I'm like, well, I can't see the actual band, or maybe the cover band is actually going to be more exciting than the real band in some cases, or at least cheaper.
The
Um,
fall you can't see anymore, so it's nice to
yeah,
kind of revitalize that. Yeah,
yeah, and that's a band with such a big discography. I feel like it would be really exciting to see a full cover band and not know what tracks they're going to bust out with.
sure. On the topic of the fall, and also on something you had mentioned before, right? How you're getting how over time you've become prolific just by aging. This reminds me of your song, which is one of my favorites. I think the Time Trades, right? I showed that song to my kids, right? That's one that you could show as a parent and be like, here's kind of a lesson for you. Um, at the end you're talking about maybe one day you'll blow some young whippersnapper's mind, right? Do you think that just grinding through and growing your skill over time is necessary to really create, I don't know, necessary, but like a core feature of growing as an artist and creating things that are more significant to a fan base? Or do you think there's serendipity as
Well, um, I guess just as a human, just as any human, we become so physically decrepit over time. Um, you know, w- that is just a given. That's what's going to happen. Like we are just going to get old and gross. Gravity is going to take its toll on us, and just our bodies are going to break down. We're going to just start withering up, and just there's a lot of degradation that we have no power over. That's just what happens. But if we've, spent time over all of that time mastering something, then when you start to be like 60, 70, 80, 90 years old, maybe you are a pastry chef at a level of mastery that is unmatchable by anybody who's 20, 30, 40 years old. Maybe you're whatever it is. Maybe you're in any field, an archaeologist, a novelist, a but the thing is, I feel like that applies to so many professions and bodies of knowledge that are not celebrated. I'm sure there are New York City bus drivers who
well?
have been civil servants driving for the MTA, uh, driving a bus through New York City for decades, who are so freaking good at that job, at knowing the exact speeds, how they can brake, how they can make their route completely precise so they get to the bus stops exactly when scheduled, how well they can get on, wheelchair passengers that need the wheelchair thing set up, how to deal with problematic passengers if somebody on the bus starts yelling and making trouble. Like, there are people who are just starting that job, or maybe have done that job for 5 years, 10 years, that are not at the level of mastery of that job as somebody who's been doing it a very long time. So it's not just in the arts. It's not just in the things that somebody would celebrate in a public way. I feel like any field of knowledge deepens the more you get into it. Um, and that is your trade off for the inevitable degradation of your physical body. And I listened to this, I just happened to stumble on this interview on WNYC radio. I sometimes listen in the morning to the news. And the other week, there was some interview with Jerry Seinfeld, and he was talking about how mastery is the most important thing in life. That he, at a very young age, he decided that there was some book that he read that said that mastery is a good goal in life, just for your quality of life, and he's tried to follow that. And so I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I thought that was really interesting. He was like saying a very similar thing from his perspective. So yeah.
I buy into that as well. I'm a big fan of mastery, and I respect all sorts of. I love that bus example you gave. I think of when I was a waiter as a kid. That was one of my first jobs, and the first month or so, I would come home almost crying because it was so freaking hard. Like I
Oh
dropped
my God.
food.
Yeah. I can't even imagine. Yeah. It's so hard to,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then by the end of college, it was just like second nature. I could be like writing songs while I'm working,
Hmm.
and that's just at a small step, and that was a tough job. I'm glad I don't do that anymore, but it's a good example as well of just when you have a really good waitress, an older waitress or waiter, and they're just kicking ass at their job, making you
Yeah.
happy. That's mastery.
Yeah.
um yeah, yeah. You have this quote in that, I think it's in that song too. Yeah, I said it before. That's what made me think of it in my head. I love one thing I took away from studying your work and your interviews, etc., is you're always talking about blowing people's minds, right? And you had explained this quote or this philosophy on some podcast. I can't remember which one. You were giving it an example of a plumber, right? That needs to put pipes in, and if the pipes don't work, then they're not really doing their job, right? But the job of an artist is to blow people's minds. Is that about right? Is that what you were
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. I stand by that.
You stand by that? Yeah. Where did you make that up, or did you get that from somewhere along the way? Because it seems like you
Uh,
say it decent amount. You
yeah.
say it in LPs too, I think, right? You're talking about blowing people's minds in LPs.
I forget, but I think I don't think I got that from somewhere. I think that's just something I came up with at some point where I just thinking about, unless I got it from something. But to my mind, I think I just started thinking about art in that way because, there's a lot of people that I see at the open mics, or a lot of my own material that I write, um, that is good, is definitely good, but that is not going to make you a living. That's not the job of the artist. The reason that I've been able to make a living in my music, and perhaps the reason that I've not been able to make a living in my comics, is that the job is to blow minds, and it doesn't matter how you do it, because that, I think, clears up the confusion about skill. Whereas somebody might say, how are you making a living as in the music realm? Like you're not a very good singer or musician. Um, and perhaps there's a certain metric by which I'm not a very good songwriter. I think if you went to the professional songwriting realms of pop music or Nashville or hip hop, um, I don't necessarily think that I would stand out as a particularly skilled songwriter in those zones. I don't really know. Maybe I would. Maybe I do have more craft in those realms than I think compared to the professionals. I haven't had an opportunity to really find out, but I think what I've been able to do that's allowed me to have a career is that whatever it is that I did think of doing, somebody walks away from my gig being like, "Oh my God, I can't believe what I just saw. I'm gonna mention this to a couple other people I know. Like, you got to check this guy out. Like, he really did something. I don't know." And that was true from my first open mic night. I gotta say, going back to when I first started playing the open mics in spring of 1998, right from the get-go, from the first night I was up there, everybody in that room was like, whoa, like, here's some new guy at the open mic who's like, he's really got something. Like, I'm going to check this guy. Like, I'm looking forward to seeing what he does next week. And, you know, the first time I played a show at Sidewalk at the open mic, when they finally offered me an actual set, probably on like a Tuesday night, like they're like, you know, do you have half an hour's worth of material? Like, do you think you could do a show on a Tuesday night here? You know, and they're free. It was all free shows, whatever. It was just like, that was full. That, you know, it wasn't sold out because anybody could just get in. And of course, I'm like cheating because I'm from New York City, so all my friends and relatives, my parents, you know, it was like anybody could just be like, "Oh, Jeffrey's playing a show. I didn't even know he made music. Like, let me go check this out." But yeah, you know, I had a leg up from the get-go, and it was because, like, yeah, I mean, from my first show, it was like packed with people, and they were all like, "Wow, like I never saw anything like that," because I certainly couldn't play or sing, and I could barely even write. I wasn't like a skilled craftsperson of writing, but whatever I was doing was like different enough and striking enough that in some way their minds were blown. And that was like one thing just led to another. And that was like, people were like telling record labels, like, you got to check this guy out. Or, of course, I screwed up a lot of opportunities too. I mean, I played a lot of bad shows, wrote a lot of bad songs, made a lot of dumb artistic moves in many years of trial and error. But I was able to do the job of blowing minds in a way that people that had a lot more skill than me were not able to do. And therefore, I started accumulating a fan base slowly but surely, you know, very slowly, but effectively. And other people never figured out how to do that. And they're like, I don't understand. I've been playing guitar for 30 years. I've been saying, but the job is blowing minds. That's it. It's like, that's it. However you get there is irrelevant. If you do the job, you can get paid. If you're not doing the job, you're not going to get paid. And that's the job.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense to me. I hadn't thought of it that way until I heard you say it. And then, you know, hearing you say it now too, and reading through your comics, even in Statix, you blew my mind when you did I read a lot of the Fuff too. I didn't get through all of them, but in the stories your dad tells, when you do the one that when you have the story from the perspective of your mom, that blew my mind. And I was like, this is really good shit. Like, I didn't expect that. And I love this. Like,
Thanks. Well,
exactly it.
Yeah, I really, I struggle with that in the comic book realm because, like I say, the comics have never gotten they've never sort of spread around culture the way that my music has, and they never really developed legs of their own, where somebody else was being like, you know, there's nobody like, yeah, so. Of course, I aim to be great with my comics. I want to make great comics. I try to blow my own mind when I'm coming up with stuff for the comics. I'm like, yes, I got to do that. That's like I love that idea. Like, I can't believe that, you know, I get excited about my own comics. But, yeah, I've been more effective in doing that with music.
I wonder if, and I want to know if you've ever thought about this. I'm sure you have, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. But I've started to notice as I listened to a lot of your music before I got my hands on the comics and read through them, right? But after reading the comics, it's really settled into me the influence of being a comic cartoonist has influenced into your songwriting, whether consciously or not. And I think even back to the early days of even songs like the Chelsea Hotel oral sex song, right, where you have the whole second panel where you're talking about whether or not the girl thought about it too or whatever. Like, your songwriting does present itself in my head now after reading your comics as comics, and I do think that there's some significance to that. Have you ever thought about that?
I don't really know what you mean when you said second panel there, but I really like that as a analysis. I would love to. I wonder if, I mean, it would just be a funny academic exercise to try to be like, what is it about the pacing, the way that I describe something in a song my sense of conveying information in a song, like where has that benefited from the lifelong devotion to comics that I have? Like where did that actually come into the songwriting in terms of like how I'm conveying information and how I'm unfolding
Yeah,
my
yeah.
descriptions of a
That
situation?
that's what I
And
see. It's a different songwriting style than even, let's say, somebody like Bob Dylan, right? Where what I mean is there's a bunch of your songs. Another, I think my favorite one of your songs is the East River. I love that song, right? And I think the second half of it, right, where you're after you become the scum, is you're taking it a step further than a normal song typically goes. There's this second part, and a lot of times those parts of the songs, it's not in every song, but you've done it before, they almost get philosophical. There's like there's a humor and then sort of a philosophical edge to it, and I don't see that in a lot of traditional songwriting, and I attributed that to
hmm.
the cartoonist. I don't know if you personally do, but that was my own theory. um
Um, yeah, uh, I guess I'd have to think about that. I love that as an idea. There's bigger problems in the world to focus on, but that is like a cool thing for me to think of. I mean, there's some very specific comic book um, things that would, for example, Peep Show, the comic book by Joe Matt, and Joe Matt just died recently, maybe a few months ago, I forget, but he had this comic book Peep Show that was mostly a product of the '90s, and he did fewer and fewer issues into the 2000s, but he would still sporadically put something out, very rarely. But that comic, my love of that comic when I discovered that in the '90s and just became a devoted fan of Peep Show comics, 100% informed my ability to write those early songs. I don't think any of my early songs could have existed without Peep Show comics, because Joe Matt's portrayal of himself as this completely unsympathetic, very pathetic, just mortifyingly loserly person. I mean, maybe that's kind of like a trope now that people are like, oh, that's not so mind blowing. Like, of course, like comedians present themselves, as like kind of an underdog, or, I don't know, like a Rodney Dangerfield can't get any respect or whatever. But there was something about the flavor of the way Joe Matt did that in the Peep Show comics that was so appealing to me, and so I just thought was so great. I just fell so in love with those comics, and that 100% is the attitude in those early songs, East River, Chelsea Hotel, where I'm just like, I am such a total loser. Like that, nowadays, maybe I'm more aware of more stuff that has done that, and I feel like maybe that's like a little too done already for me to like just make a song out of that idea. But the idea that I wouldn't be that it was okay to not be heroic, that it was okay to kind of under my own uh, deficiency.
you cut out, Jeff.
Oh, hello, hello.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. There was something valuable in the deficiencies. You could put the deficiencies front and center instead of trying to pretend that they weren't there. You could kind of highlight them and just make that what this was about. Like
Sure.
how, it's like kind of, how depressed you are, or how loserly you are, or whatever. Like, I don't, maybe that doesn't sound like maybe for other people they're just like, oh, duh, of course. But it was, something of a revelation for me. Whatever way that Joe Matt did that had a big impact on me, and it completely is a part of the identity of those songs. So, comic books really influenced those songs in that way, very specifically.
Interesting. Yeah, I had heard you say that before, and I think that makes sense. Of course it does, because that's how it happened. But yeah, that's
But
cool.
then also, I mean, it's probably not. It's never like a really smart thing to reveal influences, because it's like every piece of art, every song is like a magic trick, and the magician is not supposed to say how they did the trick, because that devalues the power of the trick itself. But um, I was listening to a lot of Bob Dylan, of course. I mean, big fan of Bob Dylan, um, but also Donovan. And I feel like huge influence of Donovan, especially on my early stuff as I was first learning how to play guitar. Those were the songs that I was learning, was Donovan stuff. And when you listen to East River or Chelsea Hotel or Life or a lot of those early songs, I could point you to the exact Donovan song that was what informed that. I mean, for East River, if you listen to the song Josie from the first Donovan record, that's Catch the Wind. I was like learning how to play guitar. I was like trying to figure out like what did Donovan do in that song? How is he making that melody with the guitar finger picking? And that's basically, where I ended up making the guitar part for East River, was like trying to learn like from Donovan's Josie. And I don't think a lot of people take Donovan seriously as a songwriting influence. Everybody talks about Dylan, and yes, of course, Dylan, but a huge part of what I might say was like the secret sauce of my early forays into making songs was like Donovan is a huge part of the template of what I was doing.
Never gotten too into Donovan. I only know like
most people haven't. That's why people think my stuff. Maybe people like rate my stuff a little higher than they would if everybody was familiar with Donovan. They'd just be like, "Oh, that's where Jeffrey's getting all this stuff."
Yeah, but I don't know. Like, I don't know if it's. I hear you on the revealing the magic trick, but with Dylan, it's almost like he's like the guy. I forget that show, The Masked Magician or whatever. Like, because to me, that was what blew my mind and opened me up as a songwriter. I grew up listening to all this old Irish folk music. My family's big on that, and then hearing how he would take songs like The Patriot Game and twist it into With God on Our Side, I was like, oh, I could do this. Like, I could play around with this, like sort of modernist, postmodern take or whatever on folk music, where you're reimagining old melody and
sure, but of course, Dylan was never gonna. It's not like you're gonna find an interview with Dylan where he's gonna tell you that. It's not.
This is true. Yeah.
So he really as a magician he just he does the trick, and he does not tell you how he does it, and that's why that's part of where it gets its power from. Of course,
the effect. Sure. You did do that though for your low budget videos. I found a cool video which isn't on your website, which I think it should be unless you're keeping it off for secret reasons, where you did like a Fed talk, I think it is, on your
Fred talk, they called them.
Fred talk. Yeah. Where you talk about how you make those videos. And these, by the way, I opened it up in the beginning of the conversation, but I'd like to end it on the topic of these, because I actually think these are one of the most interesting pieces of art that you contribute. As I mentioned before, before when we talked at the Williams Center and in the email, I'm a huge Harry Smith appreciator. I'm not really a buff per se. I just really appreciate the contribution. I think he's very underrated as a contributor to the artistic the trajectory that art has taken in the past 60, 70 years. And I find your artistic contributions to be nuanced in a similar way, right? Because you're melding all of these things together, and I think when they stand alone, if they had stood alone, they wouldn't have as much power as putting them all together. And your low budget videos are like the culmination of that to me. Like, I think they're really neat. I mean, the fact that you've had them on the historychannel.com, and like, sure, it's not like playing at Woodstock, but it's this pushing the boundary of music and technology and storytelling and making this compact little piece of something and spreading the history of the fall or whatever, right? I put it all there, and I loved that I found that Fred talk where you're kind of talking about the method behind it, because Yeah, even though you're revealing your hand, I still couldn't do that. Still could not draw one of these things and put it together and tell a story, and I couldn't follow the recipe. I don't know if you feel the same way about them, but I really enjoy them.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I love that form. It is so fun. It's so effective. It's just naturally engaging to humans. I'm like, I always feel like there should be more people doing it. Like, I see no reason at all why I should be the only person doing that. Um, I think there's other people out there who do something a little like that. I've seen people do songs where they flip through pages of a thing, but not really in. They're not. Yeah, I haven't really seen anything that I feel like is part of that genre, that medium, really, because it's a medium, and there's no reason why I should be the only person making art in that medium. There could be, I mean, there could be tons of people who would blow me out of the water in that realm with the ideas of how they do that. Like uh, I feel like I sort of discovered, I made this discovery of a form and a format that was very effective, but I see no reason why it should be like just me doing it.
Oh, totally, I agree, and that's, I think, perhaps in our age, maybe someone will pick up on it, right? Like you could do that, and it is very TikTokable or whatever, too, right? But also, I mean, I think I'm, besides people not doing it, I think there's huge utility in uh this. I love the idea that Harry Smith has of this like tuning of the celestial monochord, right? Like where society doesn't he talks about how it's like a platonic idea that Plato would say that society that doesn't appreciate music and carry on the traditions is sick and ill in some way, and you're tuning the chord to be back within tune, and that was the idea behind the anthology from a lofty artistic level, right? And the history of the fall, for example, is a way of distilling something and giving this portal to somebody to transport back, and like, and it's a similar kind of thing in your own artistic version, and I think it's really powerful for that reason. Really strikes me. um
Well, that's cool. I don't think my history of the fall would necessarily be interesting to anybody who isn't already a fall fan. Um, like I feel like when I'm doing some of the other things, like my story about Vietnam or something, in that sense, I really feel like I'm telling people things that they don't know necessarily, or I'm putting it together in a way that maybe they haven't seen. Where like I benefit from the fact that people in the audience are not experts on that topic. Whereas with the fall, I feel like that's kind of like, that really benefits if it's being seen by people who are like total experts and they're fall fans and they really enjoy seeing the little story of the fall in that format. And I don't know if people who aren't fall fans would, give a flying hoot about it.
well, I could tell you from my experience, right? I have one friend who's a fall fan, deep, and I've known him for 15 years, and he's
Is
really
there any
introduced.
other kind of fall fan?
Well, I am, right? Like I only know probably maybe 4 or 5 albums, right? I haven't like gotten obsessed yet. I'm like on the brink of it though, right? Like I just need enough people to push me down the rabbit hole, and I think it's a good tool for someone like myself. For that reason, it's like the more you hear about the fall or whatever it is, and the more ways you see it, it can kind of unlock it, quote unquote, right, for you. And
Well, that's a good point. You make a good point because when I first started listening to The Fall, I knew nothing about them at all. I had no context. I just had a bunch of tapes of stuff that a friend of mine, my friend James Toth of the band Wooden Wand, we would like always trade tapes with each other in college. Of like, I had all these psychedelic records and I would make him tapes of certain things. And then, he would be like, oh, maybe you'd be interested in, he'd give me a tape of television personalities or Faust, and I'd give him a tape of Silver Apples and Skip Spence and the Red Crayola. And the fall was just, he gave me a little pile of tapes at some point, and that was one of them was the fall. And as I kept listening to it, and I was like, it sort of dawned on me over a period of time of like, this is really great, really unusual. It just rewarded repeated listens in this incredible way. It just kept opening up as like, what is this? But I didn't really get super excited about the fall until at one point I decided to look them up on the internet and just to find out more, like, who is this? Like, and then when I noticed that, I was like, oh, there's like people devoted to this. Like, this is a whole cult. Like, there are people who are like delving deep into all these lyrics, and they're talking about all the different records. They're like, fanatical about this guy Marky Smith who wrote the stuff, and that really did, like, exactly like you're saying. It was not like the gateway to first discovering it, but it was like after they had already caught my interest, when I noticed that there was this whole realm of people who worshipped it, then I really woke up to the idea that, like, oh, like, I need to get more into this. Like, I'm not just crazy. This isn't just like me thinking this is a really cool, weird thing. There are people who like love this, and there's a lot to check out. And like, then I started to get really excited about it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I just am using that one as an example because it's like one of my favorite ones that you did. But and it's not a low budget video, but I do feel the same way about the history of punk in the Lower East Side, right? Like, you're giving this like broad overview in a new format that kind of can help unlock these things for folks that maybe that one's a little bit more powerful, maybe because you're playing the songs, but like, there's some serious musical utility for us that like this like underground thread of music. I don't think it's just the history of punk in the Lower East Side that this Harry Smith thread that I'm starting pulling back to kind of starts from, right? But from the beginning of the recorded music, there's always been this sort of alternative people's music that's kind of permeated below the surface of what's commercially blowing up the charts, but there's some importance to it.
Well, I'm just I'm like many people who are just this stuff gets me excited, and certain people just get the bug for it, like myself, and you just want to share it when you find something great, and then it's like it's great for other people to I mean, I don't know, like when I was talking about James Toth making me those tapes, like, he knew so much about music, and I just wanted to know, like, what are all these bands that are supposed to be so great? I just always had this hunger. I'm like, who is Sonic Youth? Like, why does everybody always talk about this band? Well, who is Husker Du? Like, who is Minor Threat? Who are the Misfits? Like, what is all this stuff? I want to know. So yeah, that's just always been a thing for me. And then, when I get excited about stuff, then I want to tell other people, like I freaking love this David Peel on the Lower East Side record. I love these Gods records. Like, this is all weird, cool stuff.
Yeah, no, I get it. I have a record right here, but we could close it up, but I have a record. I'm moving actually, and I was going through my records, and I was like, I wonder if Jeffrey knows this one. It seems like it's in your wheelhouse. Do you know this Allen Ginsberg?
Oh yeah,
First
I've got
Blues?
that. Yeah, that's a fantastic record.
Cool.
I got to credit my friend Dina Vollmer, who currently lives in Los Angeles. She introduced me to that record. I never knew it existed, and I immediately was like, I have to get this. I have to find my own copy of this. What an amazing, what a great, amazing document, and so many great tracks. It also includes my cousin Perry Robinson plays on some of the best stuff on that stuff.
Really?
Like, my cousin Perry, he died a few years ago, but he was a clarinet player, and he's playing on the best tracks on there. I think the first tracks that with Dylan, and it's like this like all-star lineup, and somehow Perry was like involved in that recording session.
Oh shit.
And I love that photo in there where Perry isn't in the photo, but it's like Arthur Russell and Ed Sanders and like all these people. I don't know if does your vinyl have all there's like all this insert material.
Yeah, there's like a newspaper and stuff that
Yeah,
it
there's all
came
this
with.
stuff. It's like I think
Yeah,
Joe Strummer is in. There's like
yeah,
quite a cast of interesting characters that are in those liner notes and photographs of. Um, yeah, just really cool. I mean, great inserts in that record. Well worth finding on vinyl. I think it's on CD also.
it might
I
be.
wonder if it's on Spotify. It might not be on
It
Spotify.
is. It's on Spotify. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's well worth checking out. Those tracks, the first few tracks with Dylan on them, the going down to Puerto Rico,
Yeah.
uh, it's just great. I mean, who wouldn't like that? It's
San
great stuff.
Diego, going to San Diego, and then the Vomit
Yeah,
Express. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That record, like I saw it, and it reminds me in its own way. It kind of made me realize that I think that there's a beat element to your work through mixing of these different mediums and how they kind of pour through each other. But yeah, I thought you might like that if you hadn't known. I wanted to make sure you did.
Yeah, thanks. Because if had I not known it, it's definitely something that I would need to know.
Yeah, for sure.
It's pretty crucial.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks so much, Jeffrey. I really appreciate you chatting with me. I'm hoping that the listeners will get a lot out of this. And
Yeah, I mean, do you have listeners? That's I hope maybe
I do. Yeah.
maybe somebody maybe yeah. We'll
Most of our listeners on here are it's kind of like a sidewalk cafe type of thing that I'm trying to do here. So I have a lot of local musicians that I've met typically, and we're all kind of telling our stories about our music. Um, so that's why I had reached out to you after I'd wanted to do the one with Mallory because I work with her and she writes this amazing music, and I'm like, I need a thing that I can send to people at work so that they could hear her talking about her music.
that's so
And
cool. That's great.
yeah, so it's mostly that. It's been growing decently, and yeah, that's mostly the people that are on here. And I'm hoping that through listening to some of these things, the topics I brought up, it might help them uh make their own decisions as artists and figure out how they're going to do things moving forward.
Cool. Well, thanks
Yeah.
for doing what you do, and hope this recording came out all right.
Yeah, me too. I have a backup always anyway. It's okay. Should be
Great.
fine. Yeah, thanks. Great speaking with you.
Cool. Yeah. See you again sometime. I hope.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, definitely.